Father, thank you for what you do in our lives through trials. Thank you for Dave, for what he shared and for the work that you've done. I thank you for Job and the lessons we learn. And I pray that this morning, as we look at Job wrestling with man and God, that there be lessons there, deep life lessons for us. Teach us, I ask, in Christ's name. Amen. Well, over the years, perhaps the angriest, most hurt, most confused people that I've dealt with are those who believe that they've been treated unjustly. Those who feel falsely accused, abandoned, neglected, misrepresented, or betrayed. And I've seen them bitter, and I've seen them hold grudges for years and for decades. I've seen them eaten up from the inside out. And yet most of us have probably been there. At some point in our lives we have felt betrayed, we've been felt let down. It might be a friend, it might be a spouse, it might be a leader, it might be a workmate, it might be an enemy. And the injustice that we feel, it inflames our hurt and our pain, and it can affect our objectivity and our perspective. And if there are significant consequences in our life, our indignation grows all the worse. And if the one who abandoned us or betrayed us or accuses us is someone that we'd always expected to have our back, the hurt's almost unbearable. We protest with great vehemence our innocence, and we bewail our hurt, and we point out to all who will listen how innocent we are. And whether we admit it or not, when these times happen, we also feel abandoned by God, rejected by God. Because God knows we're the innocent party, and God should have done something about it. So I've seen this many times in marriages, in families, in churches, in leadership, and in life. And so the question I want to talk about this morning is, when that is you, if you are a Christian and you feel judged and abandoned and wrongly accused and let down and betrayed, how should you respond? What I want to suggest this morning is this: it is not a sin to wrestle with man and God as long as you realise your imperfect understanding, cling to faith, and never declare God to be unjust. Today we're going to look at Job. And we're looking at a long section of Job, and it's where he starts that path from the despair of chapter 3, and he's wrestling with man and God to try and make sense out of what's going on. And what I want you to see is it's not an easy road. It is a painful road. It is a confusing road. It's messy. And at the end of it, there are still many unanswered questions. And it involves a great deal of wrestling with both man and God. So if you've ever felt hard done by and abandoned, I suspect that the Job we're going to meet in these chapters resonates with you. I also want to point out, when we're hurt, we can do one thing Job does, and say things we're going to later regret. We can lash out. And usually we're more reserved when we're talking to God and about God. We usually just say things like, why God? But Job goes an awful lot further. You're going to see him say things that are pretty raw and challenging to God, and then perhaps things we might want to say if we're in that circumstance. I also remind you, the book of Job is 42 chapters. It is 42 long chapters. Why? Because pain and hurt are not easily resolved. It's not something you just turn the page and it's done. There's a lot of deep struggle and a lot of hurt. This morning we're going to see a man in a lot of pain, and he asks again and again, why? Why, God? We're going to see Job. He's lost his wealth, he's lost his family, he's lost his health. But I also want you to notice this. While those losses hurt him, they're not the focus of his pain. The focus of his pain is abandonment. Why did my friends abandon me? Why did my God abandon me? He's indignant, he's confused, he's frustrated, and he asks a lot of hard questions. Now, these impassioned pleas, these impassioned questions, the struggle comes in 28 chapters of argument and debate between Job and his friends. Last week we saw that these chapters outline like this. It begins in chapter 3, where Job reaches this low point and he's saying, just be done, I want to die. And it seems the three friends didn't like that, and it prompted them who'd been silent up till then, to start to interact with Job. Job, you're not taking that easy way out. You're going to deal with the problem, and the problem is your sin. They wanted Job to man up. And so their advice comes in 3 cycles of speeches. Each of the 3 friends speaks, and then Job responds. And each cycle becomes more direct and more pointed. They become increasingly fervent because Job keeps saying, you're wrong, I'm innocent, and they keep saying, no way, Mitch has sinned. Finally, in the 3rd cycle, the friends are exasperated and they resort to exaggeration and insult. And Bildad gives a very short speech, and Zophar doesn't give any speech at all, it just kind of peters out. Then in chapters 27 to 31, Job gives a final prolonged impassioned defense where he declares, I am innocent. Last week we also saw at the heart of their problem is their view of God. And the friends had a very simplistic, yet commonly held view about how God deals with this world. It comes in a number of names: cause and effect justice, proportional justice, retributive justice. Basically, it says, you reap what you sow. And since Job is suffering profoundly, somewhere in his life there is going to be profound sin. And their logic is very simple. God is sovereign and God is just. His justice means he must punish sin. And so if there is punishment, there's got to be sin. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Now last week we saw that this view of God and his justice led his friends to be miserable comforters. Next time we're together, we're going to see that the other great problem with this view is it leads them to being Messiah-less preachers. But this morning, in between time, I want to look at Job's wrestling. Seems that before Job's life was decimated, he would have said amen to this way of viewing God and his justice in the world. But as we saw last week, when the problems come on him, Job begins to question this. He looks at his life, he looks around him, and he says, I'm not so sure. And he's wrestling with this question now. And what we're going to look at now are these 3 questions. Why Job wrestled with man and God, what Job did wrong in wrestling with man and God, and what Job did right in wrestling with man and God. I want you to realise it is not wrong to wrestle with man and God. Job is never condemned for this. But I also want to suggest there is a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. Firstly, why did Job wrestle with man and God? And the reason is he felt forsaken by man and God. When you look at this argument, this wrestling, the form of these debates is the form of the courtroom. Job's absolutely convinced that he could be his own lawyer and lay it all out for everyone to see. He would be vindicated before men and before God. And he pleads this again and again. For example, chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. Oh, that my vexation were weighed, all my calamity laid in the balances, for then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. I've been misjudged. But if my vexation, my frustration, my falsely accused accusations were put out there, we would see that it's immeasurable. I'm innocent. But while the form is that of the courtroom, the language of these debates is the language of a man scorned. See, if we went back a year before all of this happened, and you talked to Job, he would have said, I'll tell you this, my friends have got my back, and my God's got my back, and if there's ever trouble in my life, I know that they will be there. Now this trouble has come, and he is bitter because he feels abandoned. So if we look at his speeches, we're going to see him wrestling with man and God, and it's based on 2 perceived failures, the failure of his friends and his God. Firstly, his friends have abandoned him. Remember that in chapter 4, Eliphaz says, Job, you're reaping what you sow. You got sin in your life, just confess it. Job can't believe this, and you listen to the herd. Look at chapter 6, verses 14-15. He who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers are as treacherous as the torrent bed. Job says, you know what you are? You are friends who withheld your loyalty and your kindness from me when I really needed it. You're treacherous. And then in verses 15 and 21, he gives this analogy to tell them how it felt. He gives the story about a caravan. It's in the wilderness, and they've run out of water. And so they go to a place where they know there is water and it will help them, and they get there and there is none. And he says, that's how I feel. I was absolutely confident that you would show me unconditional love and support, and in my hour of need you abandoned me. Job then goes on and says, I never asked anything of you but your love and your support, and you failed me. Look at verses 28 to 30. Look at me. Look at me. I will not lie to your face. Do not do this injustice to me. My vindication is at stake. Don't abandon me. You see, when the tough times come, you and I both know that's when you find out who your true friends are. I suspect there are people in your life that you expect when tough time comes, they will turn tail. But I also believe that you think there are people in your life that when the tough time comes, they'll have your back no matter what. And if those people fail you, it hurts, it really hurts. I've had that a couple of times in my life. And I can tell you, the pain and the hurt and the confusion nearly ended me. And I know that a number of you have been there, a number of you are there, and all of you one day will be there. And you'll be utterly astonished at the people you thought would always be there, and they'll turn their back on you. The ones you thought had your back will be the ones sticking the knife in. Now, many of you know how Job felt. But it's not just men that Job feels has let him down. Secondly, his God has afflicted him. He begins in chapter 6, verse 4. This is an amazing verse. Look at it. The arrows of the Almighty are in me. It is not that God is standing on the sidelines just letting this go. Job says, I know that these things have to have come from your hand. It can't be coincidence. I know you're sovereign, that whatever has happened, it comes from you. The arrows sticking in my back, you shot them, God, and I know it. They were loosed by the Almighty. But the thing is, Job can't understand why. God was his friend, God was his master, Job served him well, and he's like, this is what I get? So after addressing his friends in chapter 6, in chapter 7, he turns his lament to God. And he blames God for the state he's in. He says, God, you've singled me out for this trial, verse 8. Your eyes are on me. Verse 18, just look away from me. Leave me alone. In verse 1-5, he says, my months are empty. My nights are a misery. In verses 6 to 10, he says, my life's just racing by, and you know what? I don't think I'm ever going to see good times again. I'm just going to go to the grave, vanish, and that's it. How can you afflict someone you say you love like this? In verses 11 and 21, he says, therefore I believe I am justified in speaking out and complaining about the bitterness in my soul. I do not deserve this. Goes and says, I'm not evil. I'm not like the sea or a sea monster, these symbols of evil, and yet you seem to be set against me. You even harass me in my dreams. I just loathe my life. Will you leave me alone? And then he says, why are you doing this? It's not as if I'm really that important that you would single me out and persecute me. This is the anguished cry of a man who feels that his friend, his master, his God has abandoned him. Then in chapters 9 and 10, Job responds to Bildad, but the object of his speech is God. In chapter 9, what he says is, I know I have a problem, but I really can't argue against God because God is God and I'm a man. He says, you are Lord, you're the judge, you're the police, you're the king, you hold every card. What hope do I have in trying to argue before you? In verses 2 and 3 he says, how can a man be in the right before God? How could I establish my righteousness before you? No one can contend with you, no one can answer you. In verses 4 to 10 he says, you created the world, you created the heavens. In verses 11 to 24 he says, who can argue with you? Who can question what you are doing? But Job says, I'm going to do it anyway. In verse 15 he says, I am right. Problem is, I just can't convince you of it. I can't answer you back. So he says, instead of vindication, the best thing I can do is ask for mercy. But what I really want is vindication. Verse 16, even if you came, I don't think you'd listen to me. Verse 19, it's a contest of strength, you will win. Verses 20, 21, I'm right, and yet even though I'm right, you're going to find some way to condemn me. Verse 22, you destroy both the blameless and the wicked. I am blameless, yet you crush me like I am wicked. It says, here it is, it's like a peasant trying to get an audience with the king. It just won't happen. And yet, even if it did happen, there's no way the king would listen to a peasant and reverse his decision. Job says, I'm right, but I'm in a hopeless situation trying to convince you, God. He moves on, verse 27. What do you want me to do, God? Do you want me to just put on my happy face and pretend it's all good? Verses 30 and 31. What is the point of trying? Even if there was a sin, and even if I found it, and even if I washed it clean, you would find a way to condemn me and throw me right back into the pit. Verses 32 to 35. You're God, and I can't take you to trial like an ordinary man. And here's an important one. There is no arbiter who can weigh my case and cause you to take your rod away. It is hopeless. Wow. I hope none of you speak to God like that. But I suspect many of us have wanted to. It's raw. This is a man who's hurting, he's confused, he feels abandoned and afflicted, and he feels the heavens are his grasp. God isn't listening to me. He's turned his arrows on me, and he won't listen to me. So many have been there. Times when the trials just beat on day after day and God doesn't answer. You're feeling aggrieved and abandoned and afflicted, and it seems so unfair and so wrong. I try to think back over my life to wonder if I've actually been where Job was here, and I don't think so. I have felt let down by friends and I felt wrong, but I don't think I've ever felt smitten by the arrows of the Almighty. I think there have been times where it's just flitted across my mind and I said, no way. But I know some of you have felt like that, and some of you feel like it now. And so what I want to do now is look at what we can learn from Job's responses. I want to look at what Job did wrong in wrestling with man and God, and what Job did right in wrestling with man and God. Firstly, what Job did wrong in wrestling with man and God. And I think you can sum up Job's error like this. He justified himself rather than justifying God. When you're hurt, the natural response is to justify yourself. I'm right. But what you often end up doing is saying God's wrong and God is unjust. The facts are known, Job thinks. Everyone would see I'm right. And God already knows I'm right. He's got to get him to admit it. Job's convinced that God singled him out for this terrible punishment. And you know what? He's right. We saw that. Chapter 2, chapter 3. God did paint a bullseye on Job. God did loose Satan on Job. But here's the big problem. Instead, when these trials come, Job going, here's what I do know. Whatever I know this. God is good. God is not unjust. He never sins. He's never wrong. So somehow, even though I don't understand this, I do believe that my God is working all things together for good. Instead of doing that and saying that, Job seeks to justify himself. I am blameless. And he tries to justify himself to God and to his friends. Now what we're going to see in a number of weeks' time is that when you get to chapter 32, another man turns up, Elihu. And in verse 2, Elihu says this. It is Elihu burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. That's the heart of Job's problem. Job thinks God's being unfair, so he seeks to justify himself. I'm a good man, I don't deserve this, and all of you need to know that. He should have said, God is a good God, and whatever I get somehow is for good. And he doesn't do this. He justifies himself. In fact, what we're going to see is Job does what so many of us do. He exaggerates his innocence and blamelessness to near sinlessness, even though he knows it's not true. In chapter 10, verse 1, Job says this: "Since there is no arbiter, I'll plead my own case. I'll be my own arbiter, and I'm going to give utterance to my complaint." In verse 2, he says, "I'll plead to God to stop contending against me." In verses 4 to 17 of that chapter, he says, "God, you're not a mere human, so you've got to know the truth. You've got to know I'm not guilty. You created me. You know when I sin. So you know I've done nothing deserving of punishment." And he says, if you know all this, I don't get it. In verses 18 and 22, he says, "Why did you create me? Why did you let me be born alive, only to afflict me? Why? And then he justifies himself before his friends. Look at chapter 12. It starts with a little sarcasm, verse 2. "No doubt you're the people and wisdom will die with you. You're the only wise ones, and when you die there'll be no wisdom left on the earth." And then he says, well, actually, I was being sarcastic, verse 3. "I have understanding as well. I'm not inferior to you. Who does not know such things as these?" He says, everyone knows what you're trying to say. In verse 4 he says, "You might think of me as a laughing stock now, but I wasn't always this way." And then in verses 5 and 6 he says something very interesting. He says, "You know what, until misfortune comes on you, you never take a good look at the world. Misfortunes come on me and I've taken a good look at the world, and you know what I see? I see the tents of robbers, evil men, wicked men who are at peace. And I see men who provoke God, living secure, prosperous lives. You say it's simple. It's not that simple." In verses 7 and 12 you say, "It is so simple, the beasts, the birds, the fish could tell you this is the way the world works." He says it's not that simple. In verses 13 and 25 he says, "We all know God's sovereign over all things. He decides if there's rain or drought. He raises up judges, kings, or he turns them into fools and slaves. He raises up one nation only to bring it to nothing later. God decides if men have prosperity and privilege or pain and persecution." But then he says, "The great ones, other wise ones, the chiefs of the earth have looked, and they've struggled to understand this. We don't understand why sometimes there are wicked people who prosper and good people who suffer. It is not as simple as you make it out to be." Chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. "Behold, my eyes have seen all this. I've seen it all. My ear has heard and understood it. What you know, I also know. I'm not inferior to you. I understand your argument. It just doesn't make sense." So verse 3. "I'd speak to the Almighty and I would desire to argue my case with God. Since you won't listen, I'm going straight to God. If all the facts are out there, the only one who really matters, God, it will side with me." Look at it, verses 4 and 5. "You whitewash with lies. Your worthless physicians just keep silent. You're speaking lies about me. You're saying there's a great hidden sin. It's just led me to more pain. You are worthless healers." Look at verses 6 to 12. "Hear now my argument. Listen to the pleadings of my lips. Will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him? Will you show partiality towards him? Will you plead the case for God? Will it be well with you when he searches you out? Or can you deceive him as one deceives a man? He will surely rebuke you if in secret you show partiality. Will not his majesty terrify you and the dread of him fall upon you? Your maxims are proverbs of ashes. Your defences are defences of clay. You speak falsely of me on behalf of God. But," notice what he says, "you're not innocent. You're not sinless. One day you're going to be searched out too. One day you're going to be right where I am." Job's saying, right now I feel unfairly singled out, but I believe one day it'll be you. And then for chapter after chapter, he continues his pleading and self-justification. And quite frankly, he goes too far. I'm just going to show you a couple of things, and you'll see Job goes a little too far. Look at chapter 23, verses 3 to 7. "Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I'd lay my case before him, fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No. He'd pay attention to me. And there an upright man, me, could argue with him, and I'd be acquitted forever by my judge." Ain't going to happen. If I could lay out my case, I know I'm not great enough, I'd be acquitted. Then in chapters 26 through 31, Job gives this long, final, impassioned defense of his righteousness. Listen to a couple of verses. Job 27, verse 6. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. Look at this. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. Think of a little self-delusion there. My heart reproaches me every day. Surely Job knows that. Chapter 31. This is the I have not looked on a virgin with my eyes lustfully chapter. What he does there, he lists all these sins that men commonly fall into. Lust, lying, adultery, rejecting the poor, greed, exulting over enemies. And he says, I promise you, they're not in my life. Never done it. He ends by saying this: if the adversary were able to write out all the sins of my life and put them on a scroll, it'd be so tiny, it'd just sit on my shoulder, and I would approach God like a prince and plead my case, and he'd go, innocent Job. Chapter after chapter, I'm innocent. I don't deserve this. And he thinks Job doth protest too much. You know, he knows he has sinned. He admits it a number of times. And he knows God is holy. And he knows that no man can stand righteous before God. But in order to make his case, because he feels hard done by, he exaggerates and he says, if you are right, and it is possible for a righteous man to stand before God, then it's me. I'm the one. And in doing this, he justifies himself rather than God. And you and I do exactly the same thing. None of us is innocent. Yet often we make ourselves out to be. Let me put in perspective what's going on here. You know what? Much of the counselling I do, I have people sit across me and I hear, he said, she said. Oh, why were you here? I'm here so that you can hear my side of the story and can then declare me innocent and him guilty. I want to ask you a couple of things. What if you are accused of a sin and it's true? How should you respond? David makes it very clear. Listen to Psalm 51, 3 and 4. I know my transgressions, my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. He says, I'm a sinner, I know it, I deserve punishment, I confess that you are right. Your punishment of me is right, and your punishment is blameless in your judgment of me. But what if you are actually wrongly accused of sin? What if word sweeps around the church, you've been involved in something, a moral relationship, whatever, you're very indignant. You insist on a members' meeting and you stand up and say, where's your proof? I'm innocent. And everybody sniggers and goes, really? We believe it. What if that happens? How should you respond? 1 Peter 2 tells us, 1 Peter 2, 19 and 23. For this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He who committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he didn't revile in return. When he suffered, he didn't threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. That's what Job should have done. And in not doing this, it was his mistake. Now, remember, Job's a little different to you and I. In this case, he is actually blameless. He is actually being unjustly accused by his friends. And there is some justification to his feeling of betrayal and abandonment and misrepresentation. And he wonders why God has done this. But what he does, he stands up and says, you are all wrong about me. I'm blameless, I'm innocent. Everyone just needs to know that, because it's all about me. But what the others hear, what his friends hear is, you're saying God is unjust. And you're saying God is unrighteous for allowing this. You see, when you justify yourself, the implication is that God should be leaping to your defense, and if he doesn't, and you are innocent, he is unjust. It's what so upset the three friends. And that's why when all the dust settles in this book, the charge against Job is that he justified himself rather than justifying God. Instead of entrusting himself to God, that he would do right, he declared, somehow, God has let this happen. Instead of saying, even though I don't understand what's happening, the one thing I do know is that God is never unjust. And what is happening to me is in the sovereign, just and righteous plan of God, and somehow it is good. Now there's a crucial lesson there for us. I cannot tell you how many people I've counseled who make that same mistake. It is a very rare situation. I do not think I've encountered it where I've had people come in a dispute and it's all one-sided. 100% this way, 0% that way. Most of the time it's pretty even. There's enough wrong on both sides. However, the way we are put together, our sinful natures whisper to us, you're right, she's wrong, and we minimise our faults and we maximise the faults of others. And so when we put our dispute before others, we picture ourselves sitting with Job, the blameless one. We're all right, they're all wrong. And we feel very misjudged and falsely accused. And we pour all our efforts into justifying ourselves, and often we go too far. Okay, I've got files full of letters and emails telling me why Fred's right and Mary's wrong. Most of the marriage counselling I do, sit there and you might ask, well, what percentage blame would you put on you and put on him? And she might say, well, maybe 30%'s me, but at least 70%'s him. And he goes, you're kidding. Maybe 20%'s me. At least 80%'s her. And that's been really generous. And then the argument breaks out. And they're stunned. Because all our close friends, now these are the ones that we've poured out our side until they only see our side and they're all going, yes, you're right and they're wrong. My friends all tell me that's the way it is too. I've had couples tell me this. I remember one. 10% me, 90% him. And he says, no, it's 100% her. And they honestly believe that. And I think they would swear the same if God were there because they believe it. That's how we're put together. And then they'll often say, Craig, I don't understand this. God knows the truth, knows my innocence. Why isn't God stepping in? Why isn't everybody declaring me right? And what they do by implication is make God unjust. But Jesus left us an example. He committed no sin. He entrusted himself to him who judges justly. When you feel wronged and hurt, if you find yourself just defending you and making you to be the hero, you might be falling into Job's error. When you feel betrayed and abandoned and attacked, your instinct will be to fight it, show the world it's me that's right. Everyone should see it. Instead, you should say, God is right. And somehow he's working all things together for good. Finally, and quickly, I want to look at what Job did right in wrestling with man and God. And if I had to sum it up, it's this. He hoped in God and allowed room for mystery. Yes, Job was too self-righteous. Yes, Job did justify himself rather than God. But when you read through these chapters, Job also did much that's right. When you read the arguments of the three friends, they only address Job. It's all directed at Job. They never address God at all. There's never a thought to ask God, God, are we missing something here? But Job has an issue, and he keeps talking with God. He keeps wrestling with God to find an answer, and he places his hope in God. So many times I've seen men and women get angry at God, and when they don't get an answer they like, they stop talking to God, and then they turn away from God. Job doesn't do that. His pain drives him even closer to God. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. He's frustrated. He doesn't understand this, but when push came to shove, Job said, God, you're my only hope. He refused to directly say that God is unjust. He refused to turn away from God. If you listen to Dave's testimony, he said two things helped him. He refused to turn from God and he refused to blame God. That's what Job did. Couldn't get his mind around what was happening. But I want you to see that in his wrestling, Job reasoned like this. I do believe that if my case were heard, I would be declared innocent. But having said that, Job says, but I kind of know innocent isn't enough. I kind of know that no one with any impurity, and I have impurity, can stand before the Holy One. And so he finally ends up in this place and he says, I just got to trust God. Don't understand it. There is mystery there, but I'll trust God. You know, when I think we get to glory, I think somewhere up in heaven there's going to be Job and Joseph sitting together going, wow, you too? Joseph obediently doing the work of his father, sold into slavery by his brothers, refusing the advances of Potiphar's wife, only to end up in prison, helping the cupbearer, only to be betrayed and forgotten and to rot in prison year after year, going, why God? And it's only at the end we see God has a plan to raise him to a position where he can save the nation. And he says to the brothers, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Like Joseph, Job had faith that God would finally save him and make sense of the suffering. When you're suffering and you think it's unjust, just remember Joseph, just remember Job. So I'm just going to close by a couple of these declarations of faith, and they're amazing. Look at chapter 13, verse 15. Though he slay me, I'll hope in him. I'm going to put my case to God. And if it costs me my life, yeah, he may slay me, I'm going to hope in him. Now, he's a little off. Verse 16, this will be my salvation, that the godless shall not come before him. Chapter 9, he knows. He says, how can man be in the right before God? And the implied answer is he can't. Job knows the godless, the unrighteous, cannot come before there. But he's saying, my friends, if you're right, if anyone can do it, it's me. Verse 18, I've prepared my case, I know I shall be in the right. He believes it's up to God to show you his sin. And verses 22 and 23 says, show me my sin. But having said all that, Job then has a moment of doubt. In the book he has a number of these. He goes, I kind of know this, but can anyone stand before God? In chapter 14 he goes, man is born and dies, man is sinful, there's nothing he can do. And verse 4, crucial verse, who can bring a clean thing out of unclean? There's not one. It's got to be clean to stand before God. Who can do it? But Job doesn't give up hope. He draws an analogy. In verses 7 and 9 he says, you know, a tree, if you cut it off at the stump, when it rains again, it buds and it grows. And then in verse 10 and 12 said, men aren't like that, they just die and that's it. But then comes one of my favourite passages in this book, verses 13 to 17. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, and you would conceal me until your wrath be past, and you would appoint me a set time and remember me. And if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come, and you would call, and I would answer you, and you would long for the work of your hands, and then you would number my steps, and you would not keep watch over my sin. My transgression would be sealed up in a bag, and you would cover over my iniquity. I know no one can bring a clean thing out of an unclean, but maybe you can. And here's my hope. When I'm dead, you will call, and I will rise and I'll answer. You will love the thing that you created, the work of your hand. And when I rise, I won't sin anymore. There'll be no sin, no transgression, no iniquity, and then I can come before you righteous. That is his hope and that is his faith. Chapter 5, verse 1, Eliphaz had tried Job and said, there's no one in heaven, there's no arbiter. But in Job 16:19 it says, I have faith that I have a witness in heaven who will testify for me. And in Job 19, verses 22 to 24, he says, look, I know I'm going to die. Then says something. He says, I wish my testimony of innocence could be written indelibly so everyone could read it forever. But then he gets past that. And in verses 25 to 27, I know my Redeemer lives, And at the last he'll stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. And I shall see for myself, my eyes shall behold not another, and my heart faints within me. Guys, look, I don't understand all this. But God does. Somehow he'll work it out. He'll find a way to make me clean. He'll find some arbiter. He'll find some redeemer. My heart nearly faints at the thought. Now we're going to look at these verses next time we're together, and they're amazing. Job does not understand this arbiter, this redeemer, this holy one is Jesus. But we do. So what do we learn? There are going to be days where you're going to feel betrayed and abandoned and hurt, and how are you going to respond? Well, that's what we learn from Job. You can wrestle with God. You can ask him why. You should. And you can tell him we don't understand, and you can tell him you're hurt. And we can remember what Job did wrong. Do not justify yourself to the point that God seems unjust. And you remember what Job did right. He kept talking to God. And he refused to say God is unrighteous, even though it felt that way to him. And he knew that there must be some other way. And Job, at the end of the book, he does something. He forgives his friends and he prays for them. And you've got to do that too, people. You've got to forgive, or bitterness will eat you up. And Job steadfastly clung to the hope that God would sort it out. He allowed room for mystery. So brothers and sisters, you are going to have those hard times. And you will wrestle with God and man. So whatever you do, do not say God is unjust. Do not assume that you understand all of his plans and purposes. And whatever you do forgive and you do trust and you put your hope in him. And we understand that hope is in Christ and in his resurrection, and we'll look at that next time. And that is what makes sense of the pain and mess of this world. And that's how you wrestle with man and God righteously. Let's pray. Father, we thank you. Thank you for these chapters. And Lord, we've all been hurt, and we've all felt wrong, and we've all felt abandoned. You never forsake us. You never abandon us. And you did something in Christ. And when we look at that, we can entrust ourselves to you, who judges righteously. In Christ's name, amen.